All right, so this is the recipe for brisket. Like the babka, brisket is a 2-day recipe, so we're gonna prepare it today, and then we can eat it on a different day. If you come around here, you can see the ingredients. So we have a brisket, somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 or 5 pounds, but more or less doesn't really matter as long as it can fit into whatever size pot you have. We have 3 large sweet onions. We have some stock. You can use beef, you can use chicken. We have 1 bottle of Heinz chili sauce. There's a secret ingredient. This is it. Some garlic, salt, pepper, vegetable oil. You can use light olive oil, just some light colored oil. I'm gonna start off by just putting a little bit of the oil on the meat. And we're just gonna rub it in gently all over. This is gonna help the salt and pepper stick. We're next gonna add some kosher salt, and this is called liberally applying. Remember, the meat is thick, and so this salt has to get all the way into this entire hunk of meat, so you're not using as much as, you're using more than you would think you would need. Okay. So that looks good. Salt the pepper on. And then we're being pretty liberal with how we apply the pepper. Flip that onto the pepper grinder. And so we are just grinding. Alright, so once it's nicely coated in salt and pepper, we're gonna brown the meat. We're not looking to cook it through, we're just getting some nice color and flavor. This is a enameled cast iron pot. That's kind of the most important thing for the recipe. There are different brands, but if you don't have a pot like this, it's really hard to make this come out tasting right. You're gonna take the meat fat side down. So this is the fat side, this is the meat side. You're gonna go fat side down. You just wanna make sure that it sort of sits nicely and flatly. Try and turn the fan on. And then we're just gonna do this on both sides until we have nice color. This is on medium-high heat. So you don't want it to burn, you just want to get some nice browning. Okay, and that's it. For the onions, we just want to get nice half moons. So first thing we do, so there's a stem end and a root end to the onion. I'm gonna just cut the stem end off and put that in a trash bowl, and then we place that cut side down, slice straight through the root end. The reason we do it like that, the root holds the onion together. That's also where the chemicals that make you cry are. So as long as you don't do too much chopping near the root end, you're not going to get a whole lot of tears from this. So we're going to take the outermost layer off. And then we just put it down and we slice it. Doesn't have to be too thin because it's all going to sort of melt down in the sauce. We leave the root intact to avoid the tears. There your half moon runs, and I'm going to do that with all 3 onions. That's it. Alright, so now the brisket has been cooked on both sides. You can see that this side is nice and brown, this side nice and brown. And we've developed what we call fond in the bottom of the pot. That's kind of the most important thing. We're now going to put the 3 sliced sweet onions in. We're going to use those to scrape up all that yummy goodness from the bottom of the pan. And we're going to cook these for a few minutes until they've taken on a nice color. So right now the onions are they're getting a little bit too dry. They've soaked up all the oil that was there, and they're getting dry, and I'm worried that things are going to burn on the bottom. There's not enough moisture, so I'm going to put a little bit of stock in just to cover the bottom. Normally I wouldn't do this, but I really want to get that stuff off of the bottom before it burns. So now I can use the onions to kind of scrape all of that up and then continue cooking as before. So now that
the onions have had a chance to cook down and pick up all that nice fond off the bottom. We're gonna add a single clove of garlic. We're gonna use a garlic press. This is not a, oh my God. So you can stop it. So after that disaster, we managed to get some garlic in here through a garlic press. Now we take the whole bottle of chili sauce and we dump that in here. And we mix that up well. And then we're gonna take the beef stock, and again this could be chicken stock, and ideally you use a low sodium variety because that way you can add more salt if necessary, because you can't take salt out. So we're gonna fill this bottle up with beef stock, and then we shake. That way we get every last bit out of the chili sauce bottle. Here we go. And then once this is all mixed together, are you serious right now? Once this is all mixed together, you get the brisket back in, fat cap side up. And we're gonna nestle it in. You want it to be about halfway out the meat. So that looks pretty good. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not doing it. Brought it to a simmer. Turn off the heat. We're gonna put the lid on about halfway, and we're gonna place it into a preheated 325-degree oven. Get the lid just sort of halfway on to let the steam come out, and then we're gonna leave it for 2 to 3 hours. So it's in at 2 o'clock. So around between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, I'm gonna take it out. All right, so it has had its 3 hours in the oven, and it's actually had an hour to rest afterwards, so it's not too hot. And come take a look and see what our brisket looks like at the end of day one. Now the next step is we want to take the brisket out of its sauce, and we're going to wrap it in aluminum foil. So we take these onions off, and we're just going to try and just get the brisket itself in one big piece if we can. And that's perfect. And you can see it's got some nice color on it still. And we're going to wrap it in several layers of aluminum foil. Once it has had a chance to cool a little bit more, so it's not too hot, we will stick it in the fridge at least overnight. You can leave it for even up to a week like this. So that makes this a great do an advanced meal. So when you have a big dinner, you can do this way ahead of time, so it's not so stressful on the day of. And so that's the brisket, and now we're going to take the sauce. And this is part of why you have to do it the day before. And we're going to pour it into a container that's big enough to hold all of those juices. And the reason we want to do this a day in advance is that once we freeze this over, or not freeze it, I'm sorry, refrigerate it overnight, the fat is going to float to the top, and we'll be able to take a whole bunch of that extra fat off, because you don't need that in your sauce. And so that's it. That's for day one. So it's brisket day 2, or whatever day you're deciding to actually eat the brisket. It's about an hour before the meal is to be served, or 30 minutes, whatever. And you could do this at any point, really, after day 1. You don't actually have to go to the warming stage. So we're going to take the brisket out of the foil that we wrapped it in. and we're gonna slice it against the grain. So this is very important. So if you look on the undersurface of the meat, you can see the fibers in the meat are heading this way. So that means we have to slice it like this. Now, that's this way, okay? So the reason you want to do that is if you slice it any other direction, you're gonna get a very chewy, stringy piece of meat. But by doing this, you cut the fibers short, and so that gives you the best. All right, so now the brisket is sliced, and we transfer it to a baking dish. It can be whatever size you want, but it needs to be able to hold the brisket. And so some of these pieces might be a little bit too big, and so I'm gonna cut them if they don't fit. Yeah, so they might fit on a diagonal, which is fine. Okay, and so there you have your brisket in its serving dish. Okay, there's juices in here, and now we have to add the sauce. Now, when you take the sauce out, you may notice that there's a little bit of fat on top, and so you can take some of that out because we don't need extra fat in the sauce if it can be avoided.
That's what steaming the fat is referred to.
Yeah. So took at least some of it out. I'm not gonna do more than that. Okay, and then we just pour this over the brisket. But the real key here is, and this is important, is that you want to get the sauce in between the layers of brisket. So you have to really go in and separate the layers, otherwise it doesn't get nearly as moist. So you just kind of open it with your fingers, make sure you get some of the onions in there. And then once you've done that, okay, so once you've done that, you're gonna stick it into an oven, and you're just reheating it. So like 350 degrees for 30 minutes until it's warmed through. And that's it, there you have your brisket. But if you wanted to stop here and put it back in the fridge for a few days, you could do that too. It'll keep for a few days until you're ready to warm it up. And that's it.
So brisket came out of the oven, you're just looking for it to get hot. It's not cooking, you're just warming it up.
And there you go.